So I let myself go with this script and just pretty much make it as long as I liked. Amman doesn't really have the sweet search engine pull of Wadi Rum or Petra, so I figured if you're around for part 3 of this series, I'd just take my time and tell you what happened. The other thing with this episode is that there's a lot of locations to fit in outside of Amman, but also simultaneously without much footage, but I'll explain that one later. Suffice to say, we pretty much need a whole episode just to get through everything else that happened. So by the end of last episode, we just finished at Petra, and it was time for Little Petra. That's not a joke. It's a couple of miles north of Petra. It's a secondary site called Sheikh Il Barid, or better known as Little Petra. First thing, I had to sneak around to the Neolithic village perched just around the corner because, well, of course I did. Little Petra itself has a few impressive rock-cut tombs. One of its standout features is this, known as the Painted House. It's up this rather sketchy staircase, and you're greeted by a rather off-putting grate. I was actually this close to just turning around and walking back out, like, what's to see here? But just before I did, I remembered vaguely hearing something about this, and I looked a bit closer. So the fragments of a ceiling fresco, and this was only discovered comparatively recently, about 2010. It's the only example of Nabatean art in situ, and it's a pretty exceptional example of art from this time in antiquity. So yeah, Little Petra, worth poking your head in. Everywhere says it's free, but we did have one of the tourist police guys ask to see a Petra ticket before we came in, so I can't say for certain what happens if you don't have one of those. Just something to bear in mind if you pencil in seeing this first. So as we got back on the road, once again with Youssef, if you missed last episode, Youssef was our elemental spirit guide, cunningly disguised as a friendly cab driver. So we were heading north towards our stay at Amman. We were just realising how lucky we'd been with the weather, as after a beautiful morning to see Petra, the clouds had been slowly encroaching, and now by mid-afternoon it was starting to rain. So much as it wasn't ideal conditions, I had penciled in a stop along the way. One of the visitor highlights in Jordan are the Crusader castles. I've been really excited to see these, as a large number of Crusader castles are not that easy to get to. One of the most impressive examples is this. That's Kerak du Chevalier. It's in Syria, so I'm not going to be able to get there for a while. So we pulled up to Shobak as it was raining pretty badly, but Youssef was armed with umbrellas. Gangster. So we scampered up the slope to shelter in the castle, which was closed. The reason for the closure wasn't entirely clear. It could have been the weather. We passed a small amount of building work on the slope up. There weren't any signs really explaining it. So I attempted to film a bit more around the outside. I was trying to film with my hands while gripping the umbrella under my left armpit, which went, well, about as well as you might expect in high winds. So we retreated from the castle in defeat. But I consoled myself that we still had 2 more on the trip itinerary, so those would make up for it. Oh, and a few yards down the road, with heavy parenthesis, world's smallest hotel. I feel like I could beat this mildly spurious claim by just stuffing a duvet and pillow in an old chest freezer and leaving it on the roadside, but where would be the fun in that? So it was kind of strange seeing Jordan in the rain. We occasionally even passed a flash flood. It's not exactly what you picture when you're booking your flights. I had sort of inferred from EasyJet's flight schedule, which only runs October to March, that the winter months must be some sort of pleasant time to visit Jordan. They do the same sort of thing with other Red Sea resorts like Sharm el-Sheikh, and I don't know, I just thought that it would translate into some sort of Goldilocks zone, somewhere between warm enough for the beach, but not hot enough to have you immobilised in the shade with an apocalyptic headache gasping for water. But yeah, I mean, from what we'd seen of Aqaba, it definitely didn't seem like the beach climate, and according to most historical weather charts, the 18-19 degrees that we experienced were pretty standard for this time of year. Look, I don't know, maybe you just want to adjust your expectation accordingly. Obviously there are good weeks and bad weeks, but so far we'd seen a lot more cloudy skies than clear ones. So having traversed a rather surreal grey wasteland for a couple of hours, during which I managed to purchase what turned out to be an instant espresso.
What kind of monster would even do?
Eventually, we found ourselves on the outskirts of Amman. Now, I hadn't picked this up, but Amman is actually from the same root as the biblical Ammonites, name-dropped as the adversaries to the kingdom of Israel. This was their ancient capital. So, with about 4 million people, it's easily the largest city in Jordan, which, bear in mind, only has about 10 million people across the entire country. It has many layers to it, so even after we first drove into the outskirts, it was still quite a drive till we reached the city centre where we were staying. I must have been tired that evening because I have no footage of it. I mean, we pretty much just landed at our accommodation, had a nap and a very cheap pizza. I probably earned the evening off from the camera by that point. But I was up early the next morning to have a bit of a scamper around. Okay, so, how different is Jordan from the UK? Well, they serve unsliced bread rolls with their KFC meals as standard. Yep. Also, Diet Pepsi is everywhere, but I did not see a single can of Pepsi Max in the entire country. I didn't realise it was so region-specific, but okay. As well as getting my first proper look around Amman, I was actually scouting for coffee. The Turkish brew that is the standard in most restaurants is good, but I was craving the comforting familiarity of a macchiato, and usually if there's going to be good coffee, the best shot is probably going to be in the capital. So I picked out a plausible enough looking place. This was Cafe Strada. So while it looked promising, and Atibasi is a blend I've enjoyed in other places, this was a pretty solid 5 out of 10. Somehow it took the guys about 15 minutes to assemble a macchiato together. Look, it's not the time that I mind, but they didn't seem to really know how to use their own machines. And the coffee was, it was just okay. I mean, it was just over 3 dinars for a macchiato, and no, that is overpriced. I didn't have many JD left at this point either, so I was hoping prices wouldn't be this steep all through, man. Can't say I really recommend this place, but we still had 3 days there to try elsewhere, so what the heck. Amman is a difficult place to summarise. Well, I don't have a really great unifying description for it. In a lot of places, it does have that feeling you get from some slightly less wealthy European cities of kind of stepping back into the 90s. Just something about the graphics and the adverts that are around, I don't know, and the cars too. But, there's a spot of fly tipping. Otherwise, it's a modern city, and it just is. Also, caught a glance of the iconic Arch of Hercules. I hadn't realised it would be this visible from across the city, but the citadel on the hill is visible for miles around. We'll get there in a bit. So, Amman does seem pretty safe, I'll give you that. The suburb I was wandering around was near the first circle, and it was pretty chill. Oh yeah, the western part of the inner city is at least partially laid around a line of roundabouts, imaginatively named the first, second, third circles, etc. Bit of a Dante way to hide up your capital, but okay, sure. Our accommodation was just off the second circle, reserved for perjurers, the indolent, and people who use less in a sentence when they ought to say fewer. So we got back to the accommodation, which I haven't mentioned yet. This was the Wanderers Hostel, and it was basically perfect. It has a really nice space, decorated very creatively, really exciting to be in, and definitely not perfect, which made it even more perfect. The guys running it are really chill. We had lots of great conversations with them and some of the other people staying there. It is sleeping in bunks, but they're pretty solidly constructed and they don't creak, so that's pretty good. So yeah, massive shout out to the Wanderers Hostel. Definitely highly recommend. So, because the weather wasn't looking too great, I suggested we save the citadel for a day when it was a lot sunnier. I really want to get those ruins to pop against the blue skies. I mean, hey, we were pretty close, no rush. So instead, we headed towards the centre for a bite. They also had Rahway coffee, which if you missed the first episode, that's a Turkish coffee that you brew at your table, and it's all rather exciting. I steered us to these Byzantine ruins because, of course I did. They're actually very beautifully situated. Callum made the mistake of asking me who the Byzantines were. So after inhaling deep enough to deprive 3 city blocks of their oxygen, I offered a lengthy, convoluted, and rambling explanation which I am going to spare you. For now. For reasons that I forget, we poked our head into a gift shop which mainly consisted of someone trying to sell low-res printouts from Google Images. Love that JPEG compression. But you'll only get the best quality from shams. I'm not making this up, by the way. It was starting to spit, and the part of town we were in was very busy. I was finding little to take pleasure in filming. It was all a bit grey and pollution-y. And people said I'd been a thesaurus. To be honest, it was only passing details that reminded you weren't in some unloved suburb of London. We headed to the Roman Nymphaeum, but it was closed for unspecified reasons, so instead we carried on a few hundred yards to this. This is the Amman Roman Amphitheatre, which is huge and in pretty good condition. The theatre, by the way, is one thing that is not on the Jordan Pass. You've got to go to a little booth and buy a ticket for 2 JD, but that's basically nothing. You can't complain. So, took in the views. We could see the citadel quite clearly, but the weather was pretty rubbish, so I was glad that we left that for another day. There's still another couple of museums in there, and there's another smaller theatre right next door, 20 yards away. I don't know, what's the Latin for bringing a sandwich to a buffet? But cool, whatever. The coffee options around there really weren't that inviting, so retracing our steps from the middle of Amman, we headed back to a promising-looking coffee spot we'd just passed by the Byzantine church. So we put in our order. I ordered an espresso. This is what arrived. Now, I have drunk a mug of espresso before. In fact, notably one Boxing Day when I was bored at a Premier Inn breakfast buffet, I loaded 20 espressos into 3 mugs and down the lot in 15 minutes. But this was not an espresso, it was just a Turkish coffee. I mean, okay, fine with that. I'll admit the blend of cardamom that you find in Turkish coffee throughout Jordan was actually starting to wear a bit thin by this point in the journey. But I don't understand why you'd go to the trouble of offering espresso, Americano and everything on your menu if all you're doing is brewing Turkish coffee like everyone else. Better yet, Sean intimated that he was hoping to have some milk with his Americano, so the guy obligingly disappeared, and about 10 minutes later he came back with this. We actually thought the milk had separated as it dissolved into globules as soon as you poured it in, but we soon determined that this was in fact microwaved yogurt. I mean, I guess the warning flag may have been when you looked around at the artwork and, oh wow, this art is so profound. They're not just creating art, but they're making commentary on society. The coda to this particular stop, I was in need of the bathroom, so I asked the guy if there was one. He led me out the door, down the road to Shams, I knew it, pulled back a rather flimsy partition hatch, and then left me to it. Just had to get this. My personal favourite, apart from the absence of privacy, or, I don't know, a lock or a light, was the live sockets directly above. I mean, I'm not even mad, I'm just... Okay, there you go. So, perhaps clumsily, we realised that in taking the day easy, we'd actually missed our window to go to the museum as it closed at 4 and we were still like 40 minutes away. But that's fine. I mean, that is kind of the point of having a rest day where I wasn't taking 30 gig of video every 24 hours like I had been doing over the previous few days. So instead we headed to a bar. As I mentioned, alcohol is not outright banned in Jordan, but it's not as readily available as you're used to in the UK. So it was a nice change to sit down with a pint. Now what follows, well... I don't really have any footage, I mean, unless I hold on this already quite badly composed shot of 3 pints while I explain myself for several minutes, so yeah, look, if it's cool, I'm just going to cut in more Amman footage. So as we were having a pint, a guy struck up a conversation with us saying that the government had announced that Jordan would be shutting down and that we were likely in kind of a bit of trouble. And this, finally, is where COVID enters the story. Now, as an aside here, I don't know what people are going to make of the media that came out during the corona lockdown a few years from now. I mean, apart from making these videos age rather poorly, I imagine it'll probably just be like bringing up Brexit at this point. It just kind of makes you feel exhausted and irritable. That again. At time of writing, even the jokes people made 2 weeks ago on YouTube already seem out of date. Even all the toilet paper jokes all seem old now that the shelves have largely been restocked. But it left an indelible mark on this story. In fact, it changed absolutely everything. So at first, when we were told about the closures, I was kind of somewhat incredulous. I was checking a few websites, but there was nothing on what I assumed would be a pretty big news story. But then I thought to stop checking all the English language websites who, let's face it, aren't known for leading with stories about the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. And yeah, that morning, the Prime Minister of Jordan had announced that the country was to be locking down because of coronavirus. All the airports would be closed on Tuesday, 2 days from now, but most troublingly of all... Yeah, would it surprise anyone that of those pieces of information, it was the closure of historical sites that I found the most upsetting? You know, while you probably feel like you know the ending to this story, given that you're all inhabitants of, well, planet Earth, just for context, this was a time before there'd even been a hint of a shutdown in the UK, so this came clean out of nowhere. And yeah, this is the point where the Jordan trip came to a screeching halt. Our flight was supposed to be leaving on Tuesday, and that was now looking very unlikely. By the way, big ups to the guy who gave us the tip-off. His name was Kareem, and he also gave us some great food tips, and without him, we might not have found out for like another 12 or even 24 hours. So we were now trying to sort out exactly what was going on, checking if our flight really was definitely cancelled. The government wording was a little unhelpfully vague, whether it was closed by Tuesday or closed on Tuesday, and yet the rest of the day was spent on damage control and wargaming what to do next. We got some fake KFC to take back to the hostel while we deliberated and tried not to panic. They were faithful enough to Jordanian KFC to provide us with these unsliced burger rolls. I mean, thank goodness! So this was a predicament. The next morning, I got up early again. I wasn't even doing it on purpose at this point. My body was just pretty much nudging me in the ribs at 6:30 in the morning. I took another chance to wander down the Amman suburbs. I was actually heading to the Citadel just on the off chance it hadn't been locked down yet. Well, unsurprisingly, it had. I poked my camera through the grate and at least got this shot, but that was the most I was going to see of the Citadel, apart from the retaining wall that surrounds it. So that day we'd been postponing, it was now not going to happen at all. I did circle around just to see if there were any other angles. I was sorely tempted by this gap in the fence that the cats were still condescendingly slipping in and out of as if to taunt me with their continued access, but no. This is a country where tourist police is an actual job title, and there's no shortage of them either, and judging from how bored they looked when I got to the front gate, I think they would have relished something to do. So, no Citadel. As for the other places I had planned, well, actually, I was cautiously optimistic about that. You see, we'd booked a day trip to Jerash, which is this sprawling Roman site of frankly ridiculous proportions. So, yeah, it was pretty much guaranteed to be closed, but from a bit of scouting on Street View, I was pretty hopeful we'd still be able to see some of it from the perimeter fence. We drove out the north of Amman. It's kind of funny how far out the city extends. It's kind of like a fussy partner who always has to have the last word in an argument. Just as you think you've seen the last of the city, you get over the hill and a man pokes its head round the door and is all like, and another thing, and just starts all over again. About 45 minutes later, on a day with some decent sunshine for a change, we arrived at Jerash, and already I was getting excited as I could see the triumphal arch of Hadrian. Now, Quick bit of context, by the way. While there are lots of local tour operators who'll take you on day trips to Jerash, the most promising seem to be localtrips.net, which specialises in tours around Jordan. Now, when we got to Jerash, our driver said that we had 45 minutes, which puzzled me. I mean, okay, so we were the only ones in the car, and if Jerash had been opened, you'd barely have made it through the gate in 45 minutes. And I tried to get more time out of him, but he was resolute, and I figured, well, he might know something that we didn't, so we just left it at that. So we saw a fair amount from the perimeter pavement. The Arch of Hadrian was incredibly well preserved. In the UK, you just don't get huge, sprawling and intact Roman sites like this. Suffice to say, yes, it was closed, and even though every so often we'd catch something impressive from the street, there was a lot more that we could only glimpse. And more frustratingly yet, was these glimpses were being cut short by the arbitrary 45 minutes that had been imposed on us. So yeah, surprise, surprise, this was not long enough. We looped through a slice of the town of Jerash, where there's still some impressive Roman ruins away from the main site. This appears to be some sort of Roman bus depot. Even if just this little bit were in the UK, it would already be the tallest Roman structure still standing. And here it didn't even seem to be taken care of very well. It was barely signposted and overgrown with weeds. So, grating at our already shortened trip being cut even more short by our impatient driver, we doubled back. We asked to drive to a high viewpoint to look over the town. It took some persuading, but we managed to see a couple of viewpoints of the whole site. You can see just how massive it is. And while we didn't get to see half of it or get to walk amongst the pillars, I was relieved to at least have seen some of it from afar. But we carried on from there to our next stop. So this is Ajloon Castle, which was our second Crusader castle. If you're thinking this isn't a very good shot that I've selected, well, you're not wrong. This is literally the only wide shot. In fact, it's pretty much the only proper shot I have of Ajloon. So yeah, when we arrived at the gate, there were a couple of police barring the way. So okay, not a great surprise. It's closed, we get it. But my plan had been to walk around the perimeter to get a better look at it from another angle. Well, this is about the best we got. Yeah, apart from the impeded view, there was actually a rolling mist that had engulfed the hills around. So this meant that what could have been some amazing panoramic views from the road were just smothered in grey. So this is even worse than Showback, so that was a complete dead loss. We weren't doing very well with our Crusader castles. Weirder yet, our driver was being a bit pissy with us. I mean, bear in mind, we hadn't asked for our money back or to cancel the day. So look, if it's not obvious, obviously I'm not blaming localtours.net for the sites being closed, but if you are going to be impatient, uncooperative when you're getting half the day off and still taking our money, well, aren't you fun to be around? So yeah, look, in Jordan, there's a pretty permeable membrane between taxis and tours. See, in the UK, a taxi is what you use to get home from the station or on a night out because inexplicably your friends can't be bothered to walk 500 yards. Tours, those are things that happen on coaches. I mean, I assume it's not something I really do in my home country. In Jordan, however, there's not really a dividing distinction between those. It might vary slightly, like if you caught an inner city cab in Amman, it would be a bit different, but most private taxi companies are airport transfers, city connections, or day trips, pretty much just all rolled into one, probably for the same cost. They're not choosy about how they get their fare. So look, in a country overflowing with people offering you pretty inexpensive cab journeys, you don't need localtrips.net to overcharge you and then condescend to you and pretty much get you out of their car at the earliest possible opportunity. Anyway, with most of the day left, we were dropped in the centre of Amman with a lunch recommendation for a local place. I had this pasty type thing, which was simple but nice. It's a sort of trade-off when you go to local places, that while it might be authentic, it doesn't quite have the flourish that places catering to tourists generally do. We'd also been recommended by Kareem, the guy we met the previous day, that we should try some habiba. So habiba, so it's kind of like if you took some hard cheese, kind of like a cross between halloumi and feta, and then fried it into a baklava. I mean, I realise that might not be a very helpful analogue, but that's really the closest description I can offer you. I only managed to finish half of mine before I conked out. It is covered in honey, so it's pretty dense stuff. So rather sleepy and hot, we were looking for a place for coffee and to sit down, and by far the most highly recommended place on the map was this, Bunny Coffee Roasters. It's up in the hills, actually not far from the Byzantine church we'd been yesterday. So first of all, it's not actually a coffee shop, they're a roaster, and their level of coffee expertise was equal parts inspiring and intimidating. They really knew their stuff, and they very obligingly made us a free coffee to sample, and hey, sold. I got some beans to take back home to the UK. These guys really have the spidey sense with their coffee. If you're in Amman, you have to visit. Plus, they're also just lovely to hang out and talk to. So, even though as the crow flies, we were actually closer to home than we would have been, we ran into a problem with Amman's geography. So, Amman is draped over a series of hills, which makes for some really remarkable views, but the manner in which the paths and the roads actually connect to each other is a little arbitrary and not very well signposted. So we discovered 2 or 3 times that you could ascend a couple of hundred stairs only to discover it just led to some guy's back gate and didn't actually connect to any paths or roads. So some very sweaty trial and error, in fact mostly error. We eventually made it back to the apartment for a bit of a nap. We were in the middle of getting sorted out for getting ourselves out of Jordan before the borders closed. We'd managed to sort some last-minute flights out via Athens, and then it transpired that EasyJet was sending a rescue flight, which was something we were not expecting. Most budget airlines just leave you out to dry if something goes wrong, but nope, EasyJet were coming 24 hours early to pick us up. However, this news, while welcome, was a bit late in coming. We'd already had to pull the trigger on buying our own flights, so that evening we spent like 3 hours on the phone trying to get through to the EasyJet help desk, which we never did in the end. I mean, they would have been completely jammed at that point. But, you know, it was a fun evening of just playing cards and hanging out at the hostel. Anyway, although collectively a grand out of pocket one way or another, we should be getting out of Jordan a day early and with only a few hours before all the airports shut down. So I was up again early the next morning to take one last look around Amman. It really is a vibe I struggle to adequately describe. It has a lot of modern touches and murals. Oh, so many murals. The Jordanians love a mural. But I can't tell if its more brutalist look is endearing or off-putting. Compared to the UK, it feels kind of rough. But then again, if you moved there, you'd have pretty much everything you could want from a city. And also, stop everything, there's a shop called Haboob. This neighbourhood where we ended up having breakfast, for example, is really charming and has lots of quirky but creative flair. It's along a long avenue called Rainbow Street that occupies a hill opposite the Citadel. I don't know what there is in terms of accommodation in that part of town, but that would be a lovely neighbourhood to stay in if you found an apartment. We wanted something Jordanian for our final breakfast, so we ended up sitting down here. Now, I've never seen this before. It's called fatir. It's basically a flatbread with meat and cheese in the middle. It was very tasty, but it was a pretty intense breakfast. There's a lot of grease that goes everywhere, and it's a good thing they supplied kitchen roll. I didn't quite finish mine. We had a quick final view over Amman, and we also had time for a quick espresso. By sheer coincidence, we happened upon this place, which was on its first day opening, and the coffee was really good. In fact, this was probably one of the best espressos we'd found in Amman. I really hope their business survived. It's kind of rough luck opening right before a corona lockdown, and this was a genuinely really nice coffee spot. But it was pretty much time for us to bug out. We'd gotten lucky. Because our original plan involved Youssef driving us back to Aqaba on Monday, our escape was already in place, and like a hero, Youssef was there to get us out of Amman all the way down the length of the country to Aqaba Airport before the time ran out. Not to sound over dramatic, but you know that video game trope where it's like, there's one dropship still left in the... Yeah, basically, this last day felt pretty much exactly like The Moor on Halo 1, with Youssef driving the hog and the rest of us manning the guns and scrambling to get back in every time it flips. So we got on our way just before midday, seeing Amman melt away behind us on what was probably the clearest, sunniest day we'd had yet. So 300 kilometers to come. Okay, I think the Halo music is probably a bit much at this point. I don't want my channel taken down either. It was great to see Jordan rolling past us under blue skies. The other days where we'd had cross-country drives, it'd all been either dust storms or rain. So for the first time, you could actually see all your way to the horizon. No big shock. A lot of it was quite empty, but still very beautiful. We were keeping a close eye on time, but since it was directly on our route, I'd asked Youssef to make one last stop for us. This is Kerak. It was going to be our third Crusader castle, but as it turned out, it was easily the biggest, whereas the other two were more like self-contained fortresses. This was more like a small walled town. I was really glad we got at least to sort of park up and see it. Couldn't go in, of course, which meant our final score was a spectacular 0 out of 3 for Crusader castles successfully visited. Oh well. As it happened, the road forks at Kerak, and Youssef was kind enough to take us along the Dead Sea route. This is probably one of the biggest tourist draws in Jordan that we'd not included on the itinerary. There's only so much you can do in 7 days, but thanks to Youssef, we actually did have an opportunity to get a view. Now, look, please excuse the video being a bit poor. Because of the window glare, my options were a bit limited, but I wanted to show you the spectacular mountains which then drop off to the lowest point on Earth. It really was a breathtaking stretch of road. Of course, once you're at sea level, or rather dead sea level, which is notably 430 metres below sea level, there's somewhat less to see. We were more passing the southern part, which is where the kind of industrial plants operate, like this bromine factory. Yeah. So, next time your kid asks you where bromine comes from, you can say, I don't have any children. How did you get in? What are you? Still, in the last couple of days, we'd had to take quite a number of items off the list. It was actually a nice surprise to add one. And the landscape was very beautiful. It was a strange day. I was sitting gazing out at the desert, feeling rather warm and relaxed, and then every so often my stomach would lurch thinking about our escape. We'd been kind of on edge for about 48 hours over all the uncertainty of getting out of Jordan, which was still by no means guaranteed, and of course there was still the sadness over what we'd missed. Yeah, there were several bits of Aqaba that we deliberately left off on the first day because, well, hey, why rush? We'd be back at the end of the week, so we could see them then. So, yeah, no swimming in the Red Sea, no Aqaba Castle or ruins, no proper look inside the Amman Citadel, no seeing the Crusader castles or Jerash, but look, on the flip, we did at least get a pretty decent view of all of these. I mean, all things considered, we had at least a taste of all the things we'd hoped for in the week. And of all the things just listed, I mean, we at least saw enough to show you a decent amount of footage. And the fact that we had just made it into Petra, like literally 24 hours before the announcement came to shut all the historical cultural sites in the country. I would have been really cut up if I hadn't been able to see Petra. That's something that you really can't view from the perimeter. So the number on the signs kept falling to Aqaba, and in a week where we'd seen many beautiful things, this drive was up there as one of my happier memories. And to our relief, we made it to the airport in enough time. And yeah, we could not have done it without Youssef. I've said it already, I'm going to say it again, he was just brilliant. It's the least I can do to give him the most enthusiastic endorsement I possibly can. If you are travelling around Jordan, get Youssef to transport you between your connections. He was so friendly and helpful and really was outstanding. Actually do it. Call Youssef. There's a link in the description. Call Youssef, book your transfers with him, and send him my regards when you do. So, the airport was still a bit nerve-wracking. Once again, I did not film the various police with automatic machine guns, but they were there in force. The crowds were a bit crazy, but credit to the airport staff, they got us through pretty quickly, and we sat on the floor of the departure lounge with untold hundreds of other concerned-looking travellers. Knowing this was the last chance we had to get out, I was still really tense right up until they finally let us out onto the tarmac, and we took our seats. In all honesty, it was a pretty run-of-the-mill flight from there, though based on how tense we'd been, the takeoff felt more like. So, landing back in the UK was a huge relief, but stepping into the cold air of Gatwick felt even stranger than usual. While all our parents, partners and loved ones were hugely relieved to have us back, it was actually the first day that the big restrictions had been announced, so everyone was kind of coming to terms with our future just being cancelled for perpetuity. And then dissolve into a desaturated shot of the lounge where the main character spent the last 50 days in a sedentary state waiting for... Oh, sorry. I started reading my storyboards aloud. So, final thesis on Jordan at the end of this unusually long video. But hey, if you stuck around this long, thanks for that. I know it's impossible just to take someone's word for it and not worry in the slightest, but if you've got even a shred of tact and common sense, it's really unlikely you'll run into trouble in Jordan. More than anything, I was surprised at just how much the south of the country, in fact, virtually everywhere we saw outside of Amman, was pretty reliant on tourism. I mean, there's a lot of English on signs everywhere, it's pretty widely spoken, and generally, Jordan is fairly user-friendly, at least for English speakers. Now, as a history nerd, it was just incredible. There were fantastic ruins to gawp at all over the place. Now, occasionally I have to stop and remember that not everyone is that fussed. What I will say is that if you're mainly about soaking up the sun, probably don't go in March, or really in winter. The weather is pretty liable to change on a dime, and even the full sunshine wasn't that hot either. But yes, Wadi Rum and Petra were both experiences I will never forget. They were more than a little bit life-changing. And I've already talked about taxis at length. If you book these in advance, Youssef, then you'll be all sorted. And of course, these gents were the best company a man could ask for. And even though it's taken 3 videos, this is still an abridged version of all the memories from the week, whether it was discussing the maths involved with exponentially growing hair, or Sean climbing everything in sight, or numerous other small moments that made our week incredible. This is a travel blog and not a home video, so we're parking it here, but I will say I will always be grateful to these boys for one of the best weeks of my life. And also to EasyJet for getting us out of there. At time of recording, I still don't know if they're going to be a solvent business by autumn, and I'm desperately hoping that they will still exist. They really are a great company, and you never really hear people say that. You only ever hear people speak up if something goes wrong. But I have a genuine affection for EasyJet, and I wouldn't have been able to get to most of the places I've been to without them, and I really hope they'll still be flying in years to come. Now, next time, I pinky swear that after teasing it over and over, we are finally going to get to the Channel Island episodes. Meanwhile, I try and keep it light on the calls to action, so we don't have a Patreon. I just ask that if you'd like to support us, drop us a few quid for the EP. It's on Bandcamp, you've been hearing it in the background. That would really mean so much to us. All the best, and we'll be back very soon.